Stacey Arras went on a horseback riding trip with her father, George, and 7 others in the Sunrise Meadow area of Yosemite National Park in California. The group initially stopped for lunch at Upper Cathedral Lake and then kept riding towards the Sunrise High Sierra camp. After riding a few hours, the group stopped at the cabins in the Sunrise High Sierra camp. The group decided to freshen up after the ride and set up camp for the night. Sunrise Camp is the last camp on a 50-mile High Sierra Camp loop. A total of 9 cabins provide beds for up to 34 guests in an alpine meadow facing Mount Florence and Mount Clark. So it sounds like a real beautiful area. That would be, and I mean, sleeping in a cabin is always wonderful when you normally are doing something else.
Yeah, and I think these are kind of like old rustic cabins. I don't think it's not like a Holiday Inn at the top of the mountain.
Oh, sure, yeah.
So it's, yeah.
Like a mountain chalet, but there's a bunch of them.
Yeah, I mean, you have 4 walls and a roof above your head, but it's not, anything too glamorous.
That is glamorous when
Yeah.
you're used to camping in a tent in the rain for a week.
That's true.
So, Stacey had complained of some aches and pains from riding all day and quickly went into the cabin she shared with her dad. She cleaned up, showered, changed her clothes for the evening. Now, there's an older member of the group named Gerald Stewart. He was in his 70s roughly. He was sitting on a boulder about 100 feet away from the cabin just resting. Stacey told her dad she was going to go for a walk up to where Gerald was sitting to stretch her legs out and take some pictures of the views. She asked her dad if he wanted to go with her, but he told her he wasn't interested. She started to leave the cabin in sandals, but her dad stated that she should put on hiking boots if she was going to walk the trail. This would actually be the last conversation she had with her dad, which has got to be eating him up inside because, like, if he would have went with her, like,
right?
Like as someone like who would look back at like how such major events can happen and unfold in such seemingly nuanced situations of, I'm just going to go for a walk, take a picture, you want to come with? Nah, that's okay. If he said yes, his whole life could have went differently.
It's really crazy when you think about all the different points in your life where a simple decision, they've been horseback riding all day and she was just going to go take some pictures and it's like, I've been riding all day, his back probably hurt, I'm just going to hang back here. I'll see you in an hour when you get back.
Yeah.
Or he could have gone with her and maybe they both would be missing or they both would be back. I mean, who knows?
Yep.
It's really, you don't know. But yeah, it's really interesting. Just a casual, I'm tired. And this whole kind of thing started moving. So,
yeah. So at an elevation of 9,200 feet, it would be a slow hike with a vast amount of exposed granite. So it's not, just like a low-level, easy trail as you talked about the different features of Yosemite, but it's not a walk in the park either.
Yeah.
So everybody saw her go walking over to the boulder where Gerald was, sitting and take some photos. After she finished exploring that area, she told Gerald she was going to take a walk to a nearby lake or body of water. So this is where it's kind of pieced together. They weren't sure.
Yeah.
But based on her location, the 2 nearby water sources were Long Meadow or Sunrise Lakes. Long Meadow was only a few hundred yards of walking away. However, she wanted to head to Sunrise. It was roughly 1.5 miles away, so it would have been a much longer walk, like 15 to 20 minutes of a walk. She did not mention her exact destination. Stacey planned to take some more pictures of the lake. Gerald actually offered to accompany her, and they reportedly set off for Sunrise Lakes. The hike is across giant slabs of granite with small clusters of large trees that surrounded many of the hundreds of small lakes in the area. Some locals have raised concerns about the previous statement, as the lake is nowhere in sight of camp. Here's one local statement. I lived and worked in the park for several summers and grew up in the region. I know the area pretty well, and the official description of where she went missing makes no sense. Purportedly, the group arrived at Sunrise Camp where they planned to stay in some cabins. We are told Stacey left to photograph the lake, which was in sight of the cabins. There is no lake inside of the cabins. It would have been a very long hike to reach a lake, so that discrepancy is odd. The fact changes things a lot. If she really set out to photograph the lake, then there are a lot of distances and space that could have accounted for her disappearance. There are many crevasses and spots where she could have possibly fallen, and crevasses can conceal a body forever. However, not knowing where she went makes it difficult to guess. So there's a lot to take in there, and this is again where you start having that small incorrect decisions or missteps can just slowly snowball downhill into a much larger incident, i.e., she goes missing.
Yeah, and I think it's important to hear people that have lived and hiked in the area, a lot of their life to explain things like this, because I know, I've been on hikes in parks, and you've been on hikes in a lot of parks. And when you've only been in a park once in your entire life and you were there for a few days, trying to recall something that happened, I could see how you could, describe this maybe to law enforcement incorrectly after the fact.
Sure.
Because you're not familiar with it. You've been there once. I try to think back on some of our hikes, and even though we were in a park and, on the trail for 5 days, it's sometimes hard for me to picture, some of the larger features that we saw, just because it was unfamiliar, and you're tired, you're hiking all day. So I can see how there could be discrepancies in, the location where she went missing.
Well, we've all seen those videos where it's like two different teams with basketballs, and they tell you to see how many times the white team passes the basketball. And then when you slow it down, what you didn't realize was like a bear moonwalked through the middle of it, and you never even saw. You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
They do that test to show that like when you're focused on one thing, like something pretty crazy can happen, and you will miss it entirely.
Yeah.
So like that's where like you get those recollection accounts of what happened, and you can't always trust them unless you're like a trained professional or you're used to doing that stuff. So,
and it gets even harder to do after you're exhausted from a day of hiking, and probably Gerald, the one guy who probably provided the most information to law enforcement, was an older gentleman. It looks like he got tired pretty quickly, so you got to maybe question his description of what happened too a little bit.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
So he did actually accompany her for a little while down the trail, but then he, as you said, he got tired and sat down. The rest of the group could actually still see them. So from a distance, they actually saw Gerald sit down, and then Stacey continued. It was at that time the trail guide for the trip, Chris Grimes, happened to look 50 yards up from the hill from his position in the corral and caught the last glimpse anyone would have of Stacey. Stacey stood on a large boulder and stared into the distance and walked further towards the lake, into the sunset, and behind some trees where she disappeared from sight. So she basically is walking through. Gerald sat down because he's in his 70s, and got tired.
At elevation.
And took a break.
Yeah.
So he was just going to sit there and wait for her after she lost sight. Gerald got concerned and returned back towards the cabin area and gathered the group when she didn't come back after a while. So immediately the group actually hopped on their horses, and then an initial search happened where they went after her. So they reported, when they found nothing, they reported her missing and activated local search and rescue. Gerald told park officials that he had spoken to a group of people coming from that direction that Stacey had taken, but they hadn't even seen her. So this is where the locals are saying they don't know where the lake is. She could have had a map and thought the lake was one way. But the reality is the group saw the direction she went.
Yeah.
So that does narrow it down a little bit, and then they continue to go down that direction, and I doubt she would have went too far off of any type of trail that was there.
Yeah.
But again, you never know if she was trying to get a shot or something
and
like
it's
that.
dusk. They mentioned that she's looking off into the sunset, so anytime you've ever been hiking in the mountains, it can get pretty dark fast once the sun sets behind a mountain range.
Oh, and then you start seeing stuff too. As soon as the light starts dimming, you start seeing different things, and it can get weird.
Yeah. No, it's I many times we've been hiking, and towards dusk. I always say like we need to get to camp and get set up before it starts getting too dark. I've been stuck hiking to camp in the dusk and dark, and it's not fun, and
it's significantly harder.
It's significantly harder, and in locations where there's a lot of hazards that you could injure yourself on, it's significantly more dangerous too.
Yeah, and a lot of those locations are unknown.
Yes. Great plug.
I'm sorry, I had to. Okay. So the entire search team is estimated to be around 100 to 150 people. So this is the actual SAR team. And they logged over 8,004 man hours during the search. This included 67 Mountain Rescue Association volunteers, and they represented most of the region's teams. So these are seasoned search and rescue people for that time. They had 8 teams of canine that were out searching, and they were used over the course of 10 days, concentrating on a 3 to 5 square mile area around Sunrise Lakes. 3 helicopters were also used in the search, with the park's own contract chopper in the air for over 57 hours, according to the reports in a book called Off the Wall. One report noted the SAR operation cost NPS over $99,000 in 1981. This is equivalent to $279,000 in today's dollars. So they really pulled out all the stops for this search.
Yeah, that's a lot of money to spend on one search, and obviously, whenever a child goes missing, I think people bring out all the stops. They're not going to stop until they exhaust, all the resources available, and I think you see that here. For 1981, this was a pretty massive search and rescue operation.
Some reported that the search was carried out with military precision in which they established a grid and moved methodically over the terrain yard by yard. So they were implementing more modern search tactics versus just sending out a bunch of trained people in the woods. Not saying that wouldn't work, but they really, until they started doing those grid searches, it's really shoddy if you know what areas were covered, what wasn't. And because when you're in mountainous or wooded terrain, you really need to know the exact areas you've already been through and looked at before.
Yeah, and this is really a precursor to kind of one of the cases we talked about. I can't remember which episode it was, but the hunter that went missing and how they methodically went through the woods grid by grid and like tied string up in, rectangles and covered every square of the woods. So it's cool to see that these search techniques go back pretty far. And I think when we talked to the search and rescue guy from Colorado, I think he mentioned that it was kind of the late 70s, early 80s when some SAR teams started to adopt those kind of search tactics.
Yeah, it was like this was the newer methodology that was proving to be very successful.
Yeah.
So the search also did include skin divers and mountain climbers. So they really, they went to the lake. They assumed she got there, maybe fell in, something like that happened. But despite the efforts of the SAR team, the only thing ever found was a single lens cap from Stacey's camera just inside the tree line where she walked into the area by the lake. So this is like just in that area where they just lost sight of her walking that way. The Fresno Bee, which was a local paper, reported on July 28th in 1981 that Stacey was having some family or school troubles and was missing her boyfriend. So they must have got that from friends or something, but they were basically alluding to the potential that Stacey chose to disappear when she was on the trip.